Today we're going to be talking about scientific innovation. What's something we're all born with, but most of us lose somewhere around middle school?
Yeah? Curiosity.
Curiosity. Not everybody loses that curiosity. I'm still 5 years old because I'm curious about everything. I see a tree. I wonder, why does its leaves go the way it does? Why do they all look different, but what do they all do that's the same? That's what scientists do. We look for patterns. We try to understand things by figuring out patterns. First, I want to bring some people up and do a little bit of a demonstration. So I need 7 people. Here's what we're going to do. I just want you to stand right here. Biologist? You are a biologist? I swear I didn't know. Is there a doctor in the house? Congratulations. Informatics. Chemist? You are an engineer. And you get to be the biotechnology center where I work. You get to hold that, and I'm going to ask you to move right into the middle. These plugs are you'll see what they're for in a moment. Doctor, you say clinical. The chemist, you get to work on the mass spectrometer. Analysis, that's you. What kind of an engineer are you? A good engineer, he said. The biologist, she gets the one that says nothing. All right, now your job, the most important job, is you are the public, the taxpayers, our politicians. You get to build the infrastructure.
Okay.
So you get to connect all these different people working in all these different areas together, because that's what scientists do. We need an opportunity to work together.
Okay.
All right, that's the chemist. The informatician, that's the computer person. The phantom biologist. Okay. And the clinician. You get to promote discovery. You have one more job. Okay? So here's your job. You get to flip the switch. And look what happened. Look what she did. Our biologist made a discovery thanks to the connections that we built and the infrastructure and the pleasure that is given to us by being able to work in an environment like this with many, many different people working on fundamental parts of problems. Okay? Thank you. All right. But how do you know which idea is going to be the one that's useful? And so we as scientists run into this all the time. A funding agency might say, that idea is not very good, and it turns out to be fantastic. But it's really hard to know because it took so long. You see this happen all the time, right? We have congressmen and senators who look at grants that come from the NIH or the NSS. They don't really understand them, but they happen to have a silly title. And so they say, oh, why do we need this grant on, the mating habits of some fish? Doesn't seem to be a good use of money, but who knows? Maybe it will lead to understanding behavior, which will lead to the next great cure for Alzheimer's disease. Who knows? July 20th, 1969, we put a person on the moon, right? So we did it. We took a challenge, we did it. What came out of it? A lot of people said, what a waste of money. We have poverty, we have hunger, we have all these pressing problems in the US. Take that money and do something with it. And yet, what came out of that? Many, many, many things. What were you thinking? Satellites for communication. The advent really of modern computing. Without high-performance computing, the world would be a very different place. One of the things we would never have been able to do, sequence the human genome. Sequencing the human genome cost about $3 billion, a very major investment in science and technology, a huge investment by the American public. Was it worth it? That $3 billion investment has resulted in $1 trillion in business in 2011, $1 trillion, and 31,000 new jobs, and most importantly, hundreds and hundreds of new important scientific questions to ask. Could you take an animal organ and use it in a human? Well, guess what we know how to do now? Thanks to the Human Genome Project, we now understand the genes that are involved in immune rejection. We could make a pig that looks to the immune system like a human. And instead of turning it into barbecue, we could turn it into kidneys for transplant. We could do that. We could do that. But there's not a tremendous, all right, excuse me, I'm going to use the word, appetite for doing those kind of things scientifically because, you know, there are ethical dilemmas as well, and I completely understand them. But it's something we could do. We'd save a lot of human lives. That's a really good investment. And that's an idea that got put into action. An idea of sequencing the human genome, but more importantly, an idea of going to the moon, which had unintended consequences. Nobody ever thought about it. Investing in technology and science and education is the best economic thing that we can possibly do.
I would like to know where the money for all this research comes from.
I'd like to know that too. That was my question. So the research that I talk about, the vast majority of the research comes from the National Institute of Health for biomedical research, and that money comes from your tax dollars. The National Institutes of Health is where a very, very tiny fraction of your tax dollars go that support the vast majority of research in this country. Now, companies also do research, and you know, research and development inside of companies is very important. The National Science Foundation supports research, but not a lot of biomedical research. There are others. Department of Defense actually does some biomedical research, but the vast majority is NIH, National Institute of Health.
We have 3 grandchildren that have a metabolic disorder. It's actually a mitochondrial disorder. So one of the dreams always has been is if we can identify what the flaw is, can we correct it?
Can you intervene chemically? That's one of the questions we always ask. Can we take a pill that will help? So can we replace the function of the mitochondria by maybe giving something, a vitamin or a mineral or something like that? Sometimes you can. Or do we have to actually correct the defect in the gene? And the way it's typically done is we take the particular gene that we want to get into the person and we put it in a virus. And why are they good? Because they're elegantly engineered to get into cells and send their DNA into cells and then tell all the cells to cut the wires so they can't call anybody to come save them, and then they turn themselves into little virus-producing factories. So if we could turn off all the bad stuff and we could infect people with these viruses and get the genes in that we need to get in, then good things will happen. We were extremely optimistic about this about 10 years ago. And when we began to do clinical trials, we realized that biology is really complicated, right? It's really complicated. And human biology has had millions and millions of years of evolution to be complicated. There's a glimmer of hope, but we're really still at step 1 or step 2, and that is just figuring out what the targets are, what they're doing. I think it's really important that we communicate to people about science and why science is valuable and why not everybody needs to be a scientist, not every kid needs to be a scientist, but every kid needs to understand a little bit about science so they can understand the world they live in. Thank you all. I really appreciate your involvement.